The second act, still in it, is TV Unity!
In a world oversaturated with polished performers and viral fame chasers, no one expected a 44-year-old fisherman from the Philippines to walk onto the America's Got Talent stage and instantly silence the room. But that's exactly what Roland Abante did. With nerves rattling his fingers and eyes scanning an unfamiliar sea of cameras, he opened his mouth. And in that moment, the world stood still. It wasn't just his voice that sent shivers down spines from Los Angeles to Laguna. It was the story behind that voice, a story audiences could hear in every trembling note. Roland, known simply as Buno in his small hometown of Barang Pasil, was never trained, never signed, never even flown on a plane until that life-altering trip to AGT. But when he sang, he wasn't chasing fame. He was singing to feed his family, to silence the hunger of his childhood, and to be heard by a world that never looked his way before. Millions watched in awe as he belted out, "When a Man Loves a Woman," his performance racking up over 3 million views in just one day. But behind that thunderous applause was a man shaped by storms, by poverty, by sacrifice, and by relentless faith. What unfolded over the next few weeks was far more than a talent show story. It was a cultural earthquake. Filipino communities from California to Qatar passed his performance around like a sacred relic, not just because he sounded good, but because he reminded them of themselves. A man who scrubbed floors and cast nets for fish had now cast his voice across the globe. And yet, what most people didn't see, behind the stage lights and standing ovations, was a journey marked by heartbreak, doubt, and a life spent singing into the ocean's wind with only waves as his applause. Roland's story isn't just about talent, it's about survival. And as we pull back the curtain on his rise, his pain, and his legacy, you'll see why this quiet fisherman from Cebu didn't just sing a song. He cracked open the hearts of two worlds. But that's only the beginning. What happened next changed everything. Long before he stood on the dazzling stage of America's Got Talent, Roland Abante was just a boy with a dream and a borrowed karaoke mic in the windswept town of Barang Pasil, Santander, nestled on the rugged southern tip of Cebu. Born on August 17, 1978, into a working-class family whose meals were earned with sunburned backs and calloused hands. Roland didn't grow up with vocal coaches or music schools. He grew up with fishing nets and hope. Locals called him Buno, a nickname that amusingly referred to a coconut husk used to scrub floors, a title that at first glance might sound harsh, but actually embodied everything he stood for: humble, grounded, and made for hard work. From an early age, Roland would rise before dawn to join his father at sea, casting lines not just for fish, but for the kind of survival most people only know from documentaries. And yet, amidst the grinding routine of daily labor, Roland's heart thumped for something else: music. In barangay-level fiestas and town karaoke contests, he'd step up not as a contestant with confidence, but as a man with something to prove to the silence around him. With no formal training, he leaned into raw emotion, mimicking the power ballads of Whitney Houston and Michael Bolton by sheer instinct, teaching himself pitch control while balancing bait on a boat. Locals watched this transformation with awe, as this wiry, sun-kissed fisherman began turning heads with his ability to channel heartbreak into melodies. He didn't know how to read sheet music, but he knew how to make people feel. And while other kids his age dreamed of city lights and fast lanes, Roland's dreams stayed anchored in the salty breeze of home. With every community event, every microphone passed around like a treasure, and every 5-peso karaoke night, he was unknowingly sharpening a gift that would one day shake the pillars of a global stage. But for now, he remained a quiet force in a noisy world, a hushed storm waiting for its stage. Little did he know, a grainy phone video and a twist of fate were about to carry his voice far beyond the shoreline of Cebu. It wasn't a talent scout, a producer, or a flashy competition that discovered Roland Abante. It was a shaky, low-resolution phone camera that captured lightning in a bottle. In 2016, someone casually recorded Roland singing "To Love Somebody" by the Bee Gees at a local event, and without fanfare uploaded it to Facebook. What followed wasn't just a few likes or shares, it was a digital eruption. The video exploded across timelines, especially among overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, scattered around the globe who instantly saw a piece of themselves in his voice. The humble man with sun-worn skin and a voice built from heartbreak and sea breeze had hit a nerve. OFW Facebook pages like OFW Tambayon and Filipinos Abroad Global Network reposted his clip, catapulting it to over 500,000 engagements in less than a week. In every share, comment, and emoji reaction was a collective cry of recognition. This wasn't just a good singer. This was their singer. For millions separated from home by oceans and borders, Roland's voice became a thread tying them back to their roots. Suddenly, local government officials in Santander began referencing his story during youth events. News outlets like ABS-CBN and GMA picked up on the buzz. He wasn't famous in the usual sense, he was felt. Roland's story spread not because he chased clout, but because his authenticity cut through the noise. This was a man who fished by dawn and sang by dusk, who turned his sorrow into song without ever asking for applause. The viral video was more than a performance. It was a digital resurrection of everything the world overlooks: talent without platform, struggle without complaint, and beauty without polish. For Roland, it marked a turning point. The world now knew his voice, but the real surprise came when an unexpected call from America's Got Talent would pluck him from his quiet life and toss him into the dazzling unknown. What began as a karaoke clip in a dusty barangay was about to become a global phenomenon. But with fame comes fear, and Roland was about to face the biggest leap of his life. When Roland Abante received the invitation to audition for America's Got Talent, it wasn't a fairy tale moment filled with glitter and glee. It was a tidal wave of doubt, anxiety, and disbelief. He had never boarded a plane, never left the Philippines, and certainly never imagined himself standing under blinding stage lights in Los Angeles. For a man whose stage had always been the edge of a fishing boat and whose crowd was the open sea, the thought of facing Simon Cowell and a global television audience was nothing short of terrifying. But his family, the same people he sang for at night to keep food on the table, convinced him to go. They reminded him that even the quietest waves can shape mountains. And so, trembling but determined, Roland made the journey of a lifetime. Everything in the U.S. was alien. Elevators, hotel lobbies, cameras, even the way people walked and talked. His interpreter and mentor, Ryan Tamandong, stood beside him as a lifeline, helping him navigate both language and culture. But when it came time to sing, Roland needed no translation. His rendition of Michael Bolton's "When a Man Loves a Woman" poured out like a confession, raw, tender, and devastatingly pure. In an instant, the judges were stunned, the audience breathless. Terry Crews called him a reminder of why AGT existed in the first place, and all 4 judges gave a resounding yes. But it wasn't just approval that made the moment magical. It was the millions watching from around the world who saw not just a performer, but a symbol. Within 24 hours, the performance soared to over 3 million views on AGT's YouTube channel, continuing to climb past 3.4 million. Filipino communities across continents cried watching it, not just for the power of the song, but for the story behind it. Here was a man with no formal training, no label, no privilege, just a voice built from pain and the courage to use it. Roland had stepped out of the shadows, not as a polished act, but as living proof that sometimes the truest talent doesn't come from a studio, it comes from the soul. But the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. As applause faded and pressure mounted, Roland was about to discover that chasing your dream on the world's biggest stage can come with a cost few ever see. Beneath the thunderous applause and viral adoration, Roland Abante was quietly unraveling. While the world saw a man living his dream, what they didn't see was the emotional toll it took just to stand there. Behind his soft smile and powerful voice was a storm of insecurity, exhaustion, and culture shock that nearly broke him. For Roland, arriving in Los Angeles wasn't just about adjusting to time zones. It was like landing on another planet. The cameras, the crowds, the towering buildings, even the elevator buttons overwhelmed him. He couldn't speak English fluently, had never performed in a venue with high-tech lighting or stage effects, and he felt like an imposter in a world that moved faster than he could comprehend. He sang not from a place of comfort, but from survival, summoning every ounce of faith he had to keep pushing forward. When he reached the semifinals and delivered a soul-shattering rendition of Whitney Houston's "I Will Always Love You," many believed he had secured a spot in the finale. But when the votes were counted, Roland's name was missing. His face didn't show anger or sadness, but later in private, the toll of rejection hit hard. It wasn't just a lost opportunity, it was the sudden end of a whirlwind that had lifted him out of obscurity and thrown him into a spotlight he was just starting to get used to. His manager, Joel Sag, quietly arranged a retreat to Hawaii after the show, away from cameras, from chaos, and from the crushing silence that follows when millions stop clapping. There, Roland found peace again. He posted on Facebook not with bitterness, but with quiet grace. "I never dreamed of fame. I only dreamed my voice would be heard." And that, perhaps, is what made his pain all the more tragic. Roland didn't ask for the world to love him. He just asked for a chance to sing. And in the end, it was the weight of that wish, magnified by sudden global attention, that left him battling demons the audience never saw. But his story didn't end in silence. The public had something to say, and they weren't done cheering for their quiet hero. When Roland Abante's name failed to appear in the AGT finalists list, the audience didn't just move on. They erupted. To the millions who had wept during his performances, cheered from living rooms across the globe, and seen themselves in his trembling voice, Roland's elimination felt like more than a snub. It felt like a betrayal. Social media ignited with disbelief. Comments poured in from OFWs, fans, and even celebrities who believed Roland deserved better. One of the loudest voices came from Filipino music icon Gary Valenciano, who tweeted that Roland may not have taken home the trophy, but he had won the hearts of the world. And that sentiment wasn't just fluff, it was real. His YouTube performance views continued to climb, Facebook fan pages exploded in growth, and thousands of Filipinos from Toronto to Tokyo echoed the same sentiment. AGT got it wrong. What struck people most wasn't just his singing, it was the quiet dignity with which he carried himself in defeat. There were no dramatic exits, no bitter interviews, just a humble return home, a bowed head, and a thank you to everyone who supported him. That humility, ironically, became his superpower. Fans organized tribute posts, reaction videos, and even re-watched his audition as a form of protest. They weren't done hearing him, and they refused to let him fade back into anonymity. Hashtags like "Justice for Roland" and "Roland Deserved." The finals trended in regional circles, and the Filipino diaspora responded with something rare: unified emotional loyalty. Roland became a symbol, not just of talent, but of the overlooked underdog, the man who dared to dream and almost touch the sky. Even those unfamiliar with AGT's format were suddenly invested in his outcome, because it wasn't just about a contest anymore. It was about a man who gave his soul to a song and was nearly forgotten for it. But the world had other plans. If AGT had closed its golden doors, Roland's fans were now building a kingdom for him elsewhere. The rebellion had started, and it was filled with microphones, memories, and a rising cry that said, "We're not done with Roland yet." While most would have seized the moment to chase fame across Hollywood hills or lock in a flashy record deal, Roland Abante did the unthinkable. He packed his bags and went home. Yes, home, to the same humble village in Barang Pasil, Cebu, where his journey first began. The glittering lights of Los Angeles couldn't sway him, and neither could industry insiders who assumed he'd jump at a chance to stay in the US permanently. Instead, Roland chose simplicity over spectacle. His very first public appearance after AGT wasn't at a red carpet or VIP gala. It was at a small local gathering where he sang for free under a makeshift canopy, barefoot on the same soil he used to sweep. Locals wept, not because they missed a superstar, but because they got their Buno back. He addressed the crowd not with grandeur but with gratitude, saying that his time in America hadn't changed who he was, just widened the audience of his voice. When asked why he didn't stay in the U.S. to capitalize on the fame, his answer was gut-punching in its honesty. "I sang not to be rich, I sang so my family could eat, and because it gave me peace." That response resonated far deeper than any recording contract ever could. In an age where fame often devours identity, Roland held tight to his roots, choosing authenticity over ambition. And that act, in itself, became revolutionary. Fans admired not just his talent, but his refusal to let the spotlight blur his values. His return to Cebu wasn't a retreat. It was a statement. A reminder that not all stars belong in Hollywood. Some shine brightest among their own people. And while agents may have seen his departure as career suicide, what Roland did next proved that his journey wasn't about clout. It was about purpose. He had plans, not for himself, but for the community that raised him. And as whispers of a grassroots dream began to spread, the world realized this fisherman-turned-singer had just cast the first line of a much deeper legacy. Roland Abante may have walked away from international limelight, but he wasn't walking away from impact. Instead, he was walking straight into legacy. In April 2025, during an interview on the popular Filipino show Magandang Buhay, Roland unveiled a deeply personal dream: to build a grassroots music foundation in Cebu for underprivileged youth who, like him, had the voice but not the resources. This wasn't some PR gimmick or vague celebrity promise. This was a blueprint grounded in real pain and personal memory. He spoke from the heart, saying, "Gusto ko po mag-iwan ng pamana, hindi lang kanta, kundi pag-asa," which translates to, "I want to leave behind more than songs. I want to leave hope." With the help of his US-based manager, Joel Sag, and donors from Filipino communities in Florida and Texas, talks began to acquire donated instruments and recruit diaspora-based music instructors. The vision? A music academy rooted in southern Cebu, offering formal training in stage presence, songwriting, performance confidence, and most importantly, heart. Roland had no access to such training growing up, often practicing vocals on fishing boats and performing with borrowed microphones at town fiestas. Now, he wanted to ensure no child with talent would be left behind simply because they couldn't afford a lesson. But it didn't stop there. In 2024, he partnered with Rusi Motorcycles, a brand beloved by working-class Filipinos, to create a regional ad campaign. In it, he rode a motorbike through the streets of Visayas, declaring, "Kasama mo ako sa pangarap mo," meaning, "I'm with you in your dreams." Then came Faithwear PH, a Christian-inspired fashion brand, where he launched a t-shirt line emblazoned with the words, "Kahit galing ka sa putik, pwede kang mangarap. Even if you come from the mud, you can dream." Profits funded youth-feeding programs across Cebu. He even began selling his music on USBs and CDs to fans in rural areas with limited internet, proving once again that his reach wasn't digital, it was human. Roland wasn't just building a foundation, he was building a movement. One where dreams weren't measured by views or trophies, but by how many lives they lifted. And the world was watching not just because of his voice, but because of the legacy it was planting. Following his quiet return to the Philippines and the launch of his grassroots projects, Roland Abante didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, he rose again, not as a contestant, but as a cultural icon for millions in the Filipino diaspora. By late 2024, his name was printed on concert posters from Tampa, Florida to Plano, Texas. And yet, these weren't just your average tour dates. Each show felt like a homecoming for communities that had never actually met him in person. On August 18, 2024, Roland headlined his My Story concert at the Bayanihan Arts and Events Center in Tampa. There, surrounded by overseas Filipino workers and teary-eyed aunties gripping their phones mid-live stream, he poured his heart out through song and testimony. Audiences weren't just there to be entertained. They came to feel seen, heard, and spiritually fed. And that's exactly what he gave them. Months later, he performed at the Red Hawk Resort Casino in California, followed by a show in Iowa titled From Sea to Stage, where he recounted his journey from Cebu's coastline to international spotlights. Despite being thousands of miles from home, each venue swelled with fans who treated him like family, bringing homemade gifts, handwritten letters, and even lechon for his crew. His cult status among OFWs wasn't driven by mainstream press or Spotify playlists. It was built on trust, emotion, and the sense that he was one of them. By mid-2025, Roland was fully booked through June, performing at venues like Pine Kitchen in Virginia and Sambuca 360 in Texas. Unlike most touring artists, Roland's shows weren't riddled with gimmicks or backup dancers, just raw vocals, heartfelt storytelling, and enough emotion to make even the most stoic uncle in the crowd wipe away tears. What set him apart wasn't just his singing, it was his sincerity. At every stop, he thanked the fans not for their applause but for their prayers. His merchandise? USB drives and CDs, made specifically for areas where internet streaming remains a luxury. He wasn't touring to chase fame. He was touring to give something back. Every note, every lyric, every handshake was a thank you letter to the people who lifted him from a karaoke bar to the world stage. In doing so, Roland didn't just become a singer, he became a movement with a passport. But even as the lights glowed brighter, he never stopped pointing back to where it all began. A little town, a big dream, and the waves of Cebu. Roland Abante's journey is more than an underdog story. It's a living testimony that greatness can bloom in the most unlikely soil. While the world tried to define him as the fisherman who sang on AGT, Roland quietly carved out an identity far deeper than any headline could hold. He became a mirror to millions of Filipinos worldwide, especially OFWs, showing that resilience, faith, and humility could sing louder than fame itself. Unlike many who ride the wave of reality show stardom into commercialism, Roland anchored himself in the very values that shaped him. Despite achieving viral fame, a six-figure estimated net worth, and international tours, he remains the same man who once sang to the sea, practicing high notes with only the waves as his audience. His legacy now includes mentoring young talents back home, hosting breathing workshops for aspiring singers, and reminding every wide-eyed kid in Cebu that you don't need privilege to be heard, you just need heart. His son Greg, often seen by his side, has begun following in his footsteps with a budding voice of his own, suggesting that Roland's gift might just be hereditary. And then there's the merchandise with faith-filled quotes, the Christian music collaborations, and the foundation plans that prioritize meaning over money. He has redefined what it means to make it, showing that the goal isn't to escape your roots, but to elevate them. Roland sings because it gives him peace, because it feeds his soul the same way fishing once fed his family. Every performance, whether in a packed Texas venue or a small barangay event, becomes a love letter to the people who never stopped believing. As his voice continues to echo across continents, it carries not just melody, but memory. Not just pitch, but purpose. In a world desperate for authenticity, Roland Abante is not just a singer. He's a lighthouse for the forgotten, a reminder that even if you come from the mud, you can still rise and bloom. His story doesn't end on a stage. It lives on in every voice he inspires, every youth he mentors, and every note that floats from Cebu to the rest of the world. Roland didn't just perform. He proved that even the quietest song, when sung from the heart, can shake the heavens.